Okay, everybody, good morning.
Good morning.
Yeah. Today we will talk about the most important organ of your body, which is the brain. Brain and the spinal cord. These two organs belong to the central nervous system, or CNS, right? So today we'll talk about the brain, and in next lecture I will talk about the spinal cord. Since brain is the most important organ in your body, it is heavily protected by a number of structures. So first we'll see which structures protect your brain. Okay, that's the protection of the brain. Then we'll talk about the ventricles. Inside the brain you have few cavities. Those cavities are called the ventricles. So we'll see what are those ventricles inside the brain. Then we'll talk about the parts of the brain, surface markings on the brain, and lobes of the brain. Then we'll talk about the functional areas in the cerebral cortex. You must remember in last lecture I mentioned that the surface of the brain, that is the outer layer, is gray matter. Remember that? And that is also called cerebral cortex. I mentioned that. So in the cerebral cortex you have many functional areas. So we'll see what are those areas. Okay, we'll just talk about important areas, not all of them. Then we'll talk about a very interesting part that is called homunculi. So those are the things we'll talk today. First, the protection. If you see from outside to inside, a number of structures protect the brain. From outside to inside, if you go, first structure is the skull. You know that is skull, right? And then you have the periosteum. That means the covering of the bone. You know, periosteum is the covering of the bone. And then you have the bone. Which bone? The cranial bone or skull bone. And under the bone you have meninges. Have you heard the term meninges? Meningitis, right? Inflammation of meninges. So meninges has three membranes. Three membranes are in the meninges, or three layers in the meninges. Outermost one is called the dura mater, middle one is called the arachnoid mater, and innermost thinnest one is the pia mater. So those are the three membranes or layers of meninges: dura, arachnoid, and pia mater. And under the arachnoid mater you have a fluid that is called cerebrospinal fluid. So if I draw from outside to inside, this is the cranial bone, and you have the skull first, right? That's the outermost structure. Then you under the skull you have the periosteum, the covering of the bone. Then you have the bone, cranial bone. And now under the cranial bone you have meninges. How many layers? Three. So this is the dura mater, this is the arachnoid matter and this is the pia matter. So these are three layers of meninges. So let me write it down. This is dura. This is arachnoid. And this one is the innermost pia mater. Okay? And this is the skull bone. Now, you see the spaces between the bone and dura. There is one space. This space is called epidural space above the dura mater. So this space is called epidural space. Okay. And under the dura mater, this space is called subdural. Subdural space. Okay. Sub means under, you know that, right? Subordinate, we use that term, below. So epidural is above the dura mater, that means between the bone and the dura mater, and subdural is under the dura mater, that means between dura and arachnoid. And then under the arachnoid matter, this space, you see here, this is called subarachnoid. Subarachnoid space. Okay. Now, subarachnoid space is very important. Why? Because a fluid is present in subarachnoid space. That fluid is called the cerebrospinal fluid or CSF. So, cerebrospinal fluid is present in the subarachnoid space. Cerebrospinal fluid is also a protection of the brain. So all these structures are to protect the brain. Okay, and then innermost is the pia mater, and pia mater is directly attached to the brain. So this is your brain. Okay, this is the brain. Okay, and pia mater is directly attached to the brain. Now, sometimes what can happen if something hits from outside, the bleeding blood vessel in epidural space can be ruptured. You have blood vessels here. If that happens, blood can accumulate there. So this is the dura mater, the green one. So above the dura, this is the epidural space. So if bleeding occurs here, blood accumulates here, this is called epidural hematoma. That's not. And this is subdural space. So if bleeding occurs here, that causes subdural hematoma. So we see those happen in the spaces. So those are the protections. So skull, then periosteum, then the bone, then three layers of meninges: dura mater, arachnoid mater, pia mater. Pia mater is very thin and directly attached on the surface of the brain. And you have those spaces, and cerebrospinal fluid is in subarachnoid space. Okay. So those are the protections. Now, ventricles. Inside the brain, you have cavities. Those cavities are called ventricles. Those cavities are filled with fluid. That fluid is the cerebrospinal fluid again. So cerebrospinal fluid is present in subarachnoid space that I showed you, as well as in the ventricles. So those are the locations, okay? Inside the ventricles as well as in subarachnoid space. Now, there are 4 ventricles in the brain. 2 lateral, 1/3 and 1/4. So those are the names of the ventricles. Lateral ventricles, how many? 2. 1/3 ventricle and 1/4 ventricle. The ventricles are connected to each other. So the fluid can move from one ventricle to another. Okay? So we'll see how the ventricles are connected. Here you see the locations of those ventricles inside the brain. If you look this way, see, look at me, if you see this way, inside the brain, how the ventricles are located, shown in the left picture. If you look from the side this way, the ventricles are located that way. So, first you see 2 lateral ventricles, upper 2. And lateral ventricles are connected to the 3rd ventricle by interventricular foramen. Very simple. Inter means in between, ventricular foramen is the opening. So, lateral and 3rd are connected by interventricular. Then 3rd and 4th are connected by the cerebral aqueduct. Cerebral aqueduct is the connection between 3rd and 4th. Now, if any blockage occurs in those passages or connections, then what will happen? The fluid will not be able to move from one ventricle to another. So what can happen? The fluid can accumulate more and more inside the ventricle, and that will make the brain bigger, expand the brain, because more and more fluid will accumulate, right? Cannot get out. Make sense? Because the passage has been blocked. So the fluid production is continued. So more and more fluid will accumulate, and that will press the brain to expand. And that condition is called hydrocephalus. Hydro means water, and you know cephalic part. Have you heard that? Cephalic part is the head part. So water in the head, in simple word, hydrocephalus, cephalic. So fluid accumulates inside the brain and makes the brain bigger. Hydrocephalus can occur in everybody, but can be visible from outside only in infants. In adults, you won't be able to see from outside. Why? You see that the brain is getting bigger in infants because you know that the cranial bones are not yet fused, right? They are soft membrane in between the cranial bones. So when brain expands, the bones can move away from each other. Make sense? Like this. So the head becomes big and you can see from outside, which is good actually, because you know, right, that head is getting big and something is wrong. Yes.
What would cause that?
Tumor. You know, that's most commonly tumor can press the passage and block it. In adults, that can also happen, but in that case, the brain is trying to expand, right? But cranial bones are fixed. Your skull will not expand, so that can cause more problems. Okay. So reduce the pressure by draining the fluid out, and then you can do surgery to remove the tumor or obstruction. Now, from where the cerebrospinal fluid comes in the ventricle. In the roof of the ventricle, you have a capillary plexus. Yes. You are talking about third and fourth, right?
Yeah, what is that?
Good. Now, you see inside the ventricle, you have capillary plexus. You see that red tiny structure. Capillary plexus secrete the cerebrospinal fluid, and that plexus is called choroid plexus. So, choroid plexus is attached to the wall of the ventricle and continuously secrete the cerebrospinal fluid or CSF inside the ventricle. Is it clear? Okay. So, that is the cerebrospinal fluid in the ventricle. Now the question is, from where the cerebrospinal fluid comes in subarachnoid space. You see, I showed you here a few minutes ago that cerebrospinal fluid also is present in subarachnoid space. In arachnoid matter, if this is the arachnoid matter, that middle layer of meninges has extensions like these are called villi, finger-like structures. And this villi of subarachnoid, this villi of arachnoid matter, so subarachnoid cerebrospinal fluid. Now, this picture is showing the flow of the cerebrospinal fluid. Cerebrospinal fluid is continuously circulating or flowing. So you see the direction. Cerebrospinal fluid goes from the ventricles to the subarachnoid space, and also subarachnoid space. From subarachnoid space, the cerebrospinal fluid can enter into the ventricles. And one thing you see here, from the fourth ventricle, cerebrospinal fluid goes down this way and then gets out this way and enters into subarachnoid space like this, and also goes around the spinal cord. So cerebrospinal fluid also enters around the spinal cord. So there are two apertures. Aperture means opening like this, windows. So two windows or apertures here, the lateral aperture and median aperture. And through those windows, the fluid gets out. Also, the fluid enters into a narrow canal which is located inside the spinal cord. That is called the central canal, is central canal of the spinal cord. So cerebrospinal fluid circulates around the spinal cord as well as inside the spinal cord. Yes. Second? We'll hear the sound, right? The siren. Okay, so that's the flow of cerebrospinal fluid inside the ventricle in subarachnoid space. Not only that, goes around the spinal cord, right? And passes through the spinal cord. And the cerebrospinal fluid provides protection to your brain and the spinal cord. How? You know that, just think that if there is no fluid around your brain, okay? If that is the condition, no fluid around your brain, when you suddenly shake your head, move your body suddenly, what would have happened? The brain would hit the hard skull, right? Because there is no fluid. Every time you suddenly move, there is a chance that your soft brain would hit the skull, hard bone, right? And that will cause the damage of the brain. You know, sometimes you ride the roller coaster, suddenly moves right from one direction to another. So that is the protection given by cerebrospinal fluid. Number two, cerebrospinal fluid has nutrition in it. So, keeps the brain and the spinal cord healthy, nourishes the brain and the spinal cord. Some neurochemicals or neurotransmitters are also present in the cerebrospinal fluid. So those three, remember, protection to the brain and the spinal cord, number one. Number two, provides nutrition to keep the brain tissue and the spinal cord tissue healthy. And number three, some neurochemicals or neurotransmitters are also present in the cerebrospinal fluid. And from where the cerebrospinal fluid comes, inside the ventricle, from the choroid plexus, and in the subarachnoid space from the villi. They secrete the cerebrospinal fluid. Okay. Parts of your brain. Your brain is divided into 4 parts. The largest part is the cerebellum. Now if I show you the brain, so this is the brain, and if I show you the brain at first sight or glance, the part you see, this is the largest part of the brain. That is called what? No, this whole part, cerebellum. Cerebellum. And that is the largest part. And below the posterior part of cerebellum, under the posterior part of cerebellum, you have this part that is called cerebellum. And this structure is called the brain stem. And inside the brain, you have another part, this part, that is called the encephalon. So let me show you again. This is the cerebellum, the whole thing. This is the cerebellum. This is the brain stem, and inside this part is called the diencephalon. Is it clear? Mm-hmm. Okay. So now you see cerebellum is divided into 2 halves, right? Each half is called a hemisphere. Hemi means half. Hemi, whole thing is the sphere, right? And half is hemisphere. So how many hemisphere you have in cerebellum? 2, right and left. Hemi, half. 2 halves. And the hemispheres are separated by, you see here, this is called a fissure, deep cut or groove. This deep groove is called the longitudinal fissure, going like sagittal plane. You know, this is the sagittal plane. Remember that?
Yeah.
Okay. So along the sagittal plane, mid-sagittal plane, this fissure or deep groove is called the longitudinal fissure. Okay? That separates 2 hemispheres. Okay. Now see here. This is another groove here that separates cerebellum and cerebellum. Cerebellum is above, cerebellum is below. And this groove is called transverse fissure because it is going transversely. Make sense? The transverse fissure separates cerebellum and cerebellum. Okay. Now, let me write down those parts. Largest part is called the cerebellum. Okay. Then you have cerebellum. Then you have brain stem and diencephalon. Okay, these are the 4 parts of the brain. Now, cerebellum is divided into right and left hemispheres. right and left hemispheres. Okay. The function of the cerebrum. You must remember, I showed you this is the brain, and outer surface of the brain is the cortex, and that is called the cerebral cortex because this part is called the cerebrum of the brain. So this is the cerebrum, and the outer layer or covering is called the cerebral cortex. Cortex. So that is the gray matter, right? And white matter. So gray matter part of cerebrum, that is the outer layer or outer part, and that is called the cerebral cortex. And I also mentioned a few minutes before that in the cortex you have several functional areas. So if I ask you what's the function of the cerebrum, just mention that different functional areas are located in the cerebral cortex. Different functional areas. We will talk about those functional areas later. Just to know in one sentence, in the cerebral cortex you have different functional areas. Then cerebellum. Cerebellum, this structure is very important. The main function of cerebellum is maintaining balance and equilibrium of the body. So maintaining the balance and equilibrium is the main function of the cerebellum. Okay. Brainstem. Brainstem consists of three structures: midbrain, pons, and medulla, also called medulla oblongata. Medulla oblongata. So brainstem consists of three parts: midbrain, pons, and medulla oblongata. If you see this brain, this part is called the midbrain, only this part is here. Then this is the round structure here, you see, this is called the pons, and this part is called the medulla. So midbrain, pons, medulla oblongata. Those three together is the brain stem. Okay, these three: midbrain, pons, medulla. And the function of the brain stem. Brain stem, you can write it down. Number one, regulates the reflexes. Important reflexes are controlled by the brain stem. Number two, respiratory and cardiac centers are located in the brain stem. So very important centers that regulate your heart and breathing. So respiratory and what? Cardiac centers. So now you just think that if this structure is destroyed, then your heart can get stopped. Your breathing can be stopped, right? Because those centers are located there. And that happens, if something hits here where you have the brain stem inside, that can kill the person immediately. And this is a very weak area in the body because cardiac and respiratory centers are there. Diencephalon. Diencephalon consists of thalamus, hypothalamus. Hypo means below. So below the thalamus you have hypothalamus. And pituitary gland. pituitary gland. So these belong to diencephalon. Thalamus, hypothalamus, and pituitary. This structure here, when you see the brain model, you will see more closely. This is called the thalamus, and this area below that is called the hypothalamus. And pituitary gland is here. It has been taken out, so you don't see that. So thalamus, hypothalamus, and pituitary is here. Those three belong to the diencephalon. Okay. Thalamus, a very important structure of your brain. Why? Because almost all sensory signals are relayed in the thalamus. Touch, touch is a sensory signal, right? Perception, touch, pain, temperature, those are sensations, right? All those sensory signals are taken to the thalamus and processed there. So that's why thalamus is called the major sensory relay station. You can write it down. One sentence. Thalamus is called what? Major sensory relay station. That means almost all important sensory signals are processed there. Did you get it? What did I say? What are the sensory signals? What are the sensory signals? Touch, pain, temperature, right? Those are the sensory signals. Your taste, sensation, right? Going to the brain. Sensory, going to the brain. Sight is also sensory. Special sense, yeah. Smell. In last class I mentioned that sensory input goes to the brain, right? Towards the brain. So if I touch, that signal goes towards the brain, right? If something bites you, that pain signal that goes to the brain, right? Vision goes to the brain, right? Sight. Taste from tongue goes to the brain, right? All those are sensory signals. And most of them are processed in the thalamus. Is it clear? Okay. Hypothalamus. Below the thalamus, you have the hypothalamus. Hypo means below. Hypothalamus has a number of important functions. I'll just mention few for you. Number one, it controls the pituitary gland. Controls what? The pituitary gland. Pituitary gland is called the master gland, you know that, right? So master has a master, right? Hypothalamus is the boss of pituitary, and pituitary is the boss of other glands of your body. Number two, regulation of body temperature. When I talked about the integumentary system, you must remember hypothalamus stimulates the sweat glands to release sweat. Remember that? Hypothalamus, and dilates the blood vessels. So hypothalamus regulates the body temperature. Number three, hypothalamus, this is very interesting function, controls the food and water intake. This is interesting, right? How much you will eat and drink, that is controlled by the hypothalamus. When you are thirsty, right? You think you will drink a lot, right? When you are hungry, what do you think? You think you will eat a lot, right? Then you get the food and you start eating. First you eat very fast, right? Because you are hungry. Then what happens? Gradually, you start to lose interest, right? I won't eat anymore. And at one point you stop eating, right? So something is in the brain that is telling you, you are saturated. You don't have to drink anymore. You don't have to eat anymore. In your blood, enough nutrition is not there. So that is the hypothalamus. Regulates the food and water intake. Now if hypothalamus is abnormal or destroyed, then the person will not know when to stop. Make sense? and the person will keep eating. That is a clinical condition. Okay, so the person will get very obese. You will see there are some people, they don't know, they keep eating. Okay, there could be some problem in the hypothalamus. That could be one reason. Okay. So those are few important functions of the cerebellum. So if I ask you what are the parts of the brain, these are the four parts. If I ask you, cerebellum consists of what? Two hemispheres, right? And on the surface of the cerebellum, you have many functional areas. Is it clear? We'll talk about those functional areas later. Then cerebellum, maintaining what? Equilibrium and balance, right? You can train your cerebellum if you start learning from very early stage of life. You will see some girls, they are very good in walking on the road, right, or maintaining the balance. In Olympic you will see but they are trained from very early stage of their life, so their cerebellum is connected that way. The connections in the cerebellum develops that way. So cerebellum. Then brainstem has three parts: midbrain, pons, medulla oblongata, diencephalon, thalamus, hypothalamus, pituitary. And I have mentioned the functions. This picture is showing all those parts by different colors. Now, the surface of the hemisphere. You see, on the surface of the hemisphere, you have many grooves. You see the grooves, lines here. There are two types of grooves. If you see the surface, there are many shallow grooves and also few deep grooves that I have already shown you, the deep grooves. Okay. These shallow grooves are called sulci. Some people say sulci. I prefer sulci. So all these, you see the shallow grooves here on the surface of the cerebral hemisphere, these are sulci. Make sense? And deep grooves are only few. I have already mentioned. One is here, that is called the fissure, transverse fissure, longitudinal fissure. Okay, so there are few deep grooves, those are called fissures. So deep groove is a fissure, and shallow grooves are sulci. And the area between two sulci is called a gyrus. So you see here, this is one sulcus. Sulcus is singular. If I indicate one, that is sulcus. If I indicate more than one, sulci. So between these two sulci, this area is called a gyrus. Gyrus. And plural is gyri. Some people say gyri. Gyri. Okay. So now we can say that on the surface of the hemisphere you have many sulci and many gyri. So let me show you one. This is a sulcus, this is a sulcus, in between this is the gyrus, the ridges. Okay, so why you have so many grooves on the surface of the cerebrum? Why? What do you think? Why you have so many grooves like this?
Increases the surface area.
Increases the surface area, right? It's like curtain. The curtain you use in the windows. You can squeeze, right? Fold like this, make it small, but you can, when you spread it, big surface, right? So increases the surface area. That means actually if you make the whole surface flat, this is huge. Is it clear? And that accommodate lot of neurons, right? More surface, more neurons. Is it clear? And in human brain, you have more sulci than other creatures. That's why human brain is smart, right? Because the surface area is big. Although the brain is not that big, like some other creatures, but the grooves are many. So if you have more grooves in your brain, you are smarter. Okay, less grooves, less smart. This is simple way to think. Like more neurons, better processing. Yes.
Do we get more sulci
Yes.
as our brain grows?
Yeah. During the growth of the brain. During the growth of the brain, if you are a critical thinker, you go through critical thinking, those processes, the neurons get healthier as well as the surface area gets bigger. The experiment has shown that. There is an experiment, they preserved, Einstein, his brain, and they studied the brain tissue, cerebral hemisphere, and found that the size of his neurons is bigger than average people's size, and also the surface area is bigger. Okay? So it is in general, perception, has scientific ground in it. A brain plasticity, that is called plasticity, is it ends in like around 17, 18 years. After that, when you, easy way to know is when the kids, that is my, perception, when the kids can learn a language. I worked on brain. I did research for many years on brain. So a lot of interesting things. Adult brain has plasticity. That was my research actually. Adult brain has plasticity, but not even close, in early stages.
But
Younger
that
brain.
plasticity remains during the duration of your life.
Whole life, yeah, whole life, but gets very weak, yeah. When the plasticity is almost gone, you will not memorize anything. Okay, you will work based on your experience. No more new learning. Yes, it becomes a problem. Dementia, right? Because the plasticity is gone. Okay, so the shallow grooves are sulci, deep grooves are fissures. Just know that. And in between the sulci, these are the gyri. And in each hemisphere, you have 5 lobes. Frontal lobe, this one in the front, then parietal lobe here, in the back you have occipital lobe, and this is temporal lobe. So this is easy because these lobes are more or less under that bone. This is frontal bone, remember that? So under the frontal bone, it's not exactly the superimposed, but there is a kind of most part of it. So under this frontal bone, you have the frontal lobe. Under parietal bone, you have the parietal lobe. Under temporal, you have the temporal lobe, and occipital, you have the occipital lobe in the back. Okay, and inside you have another lobe that is called insula. So those are the 5 lobes, but from outside you can see only 4. Here you see by different colors, you can see different lobes. Frontal, then behind the frontal you have parietal, and behind that you have occipital, and below the frontal and parietal you have the temporal. Now these lobes are separated by sulcus. Which sulcus separates the frontal and parietal. You see the red and the light blue. Central sulcus. Central sulcus is very important. That separates the frontal lobe and parietal lobe. Parieto-occipital sulcus. Its name is telling you. Parieto-occipital. Between parietal and occipital. Separates parietal and occipital lobes. Lateral sulcus separates temporal from the lobes above. That means above the temporal you see you have frontal and parietal. So lateral sulcus separates temporal lobe from the lobes above it. Which lobes? Frontal and parietal. So those are three important sulci that separate the lobes. But you also know that there are many other sulci in all over. Now, insula is located inside. So if you look through the lateral sulcus, like this is the lateral sulcus, you know, this is the lateral sulcus, this is temporal lobe. So if you just open like this, inside you will see the insula. Insula is mainly responsible for the processing of taste signal from the tongue. The taste signal is processed in the insula. Now, you remember I said the function of cerebellum is on the surface, which is the cortex. You have several functional areas, right? Remember that? So, what are the important functional areas you have on the surface of the cerebellum? In the back part, you see here, that is called the primary visual cortex in the back. That means the signal from your eyes go there and processed there. That's why it is called primary, means main visual cortex. Here in the back. In this area, you see here, above the temporal lobe, the upper part of the temporal lobe actually, here, this is called the primary auditory. The main area that processes the sound, audition. Here, this area, see the green area here. So primary visual, primary auditory. Then in front of central sulcus, you have primary motor cortex. You see the central sulcus I showed you that separates the frontal and parietal lobe. In front of the central sulcus, that gyrus, you see the long red colored gyrus, that is called the primary motor cortex. And behind the central sulcus, that blue long gyrus, that is called the primary somatosensory cortex. So, primary motor is in front of the central sulcus, primary somatosensory is behind the central sulcus. Now you tell me, primary means what? Main. Motor. Motor control. In last class I told you, motor output goes to the muscles, remember? And to the glands, right? So, the movement of body parts is controlled by primary motor cortex. Is it clear? All kinds of movements. Very important. Signal goes from there to the muscles. Now, sensation, somatosensory, means pain, touch, temperature. So those sensory signals are processed in the primary somatosensory cortex. Make sense? Primary means main, somatosensations, somatic pain touch temperature. So you see those two areas are also very important. In the middle of the frontal lobe, you see the area shown by dotted line. That area is also a very interesting, important area. It's called Broca's area. B-R-O-C-A-S. Broca's area. This area is responsible for, should be there, Broca's. B-R-O-C-A-S. Broca's area. Broca's is the name of a person. Broca. I'll talk about that. So Broca's area is responsible for the production of speech. So when you speak, that area sends signal to the vocal cord. You know vocal cord, right? Gets signal from that area that controls the vocal cord. So you can produce speech. Is it clear? Broca was a French neurologist, a doctor, and he had a patient, okay, for many years. And at one point, his patient got stroke in the brain, okay, and lost his ability to speak. So Broca's, after that patient died, after many years, he took his brain out, okay, and studied the whole brain under the microscope, okay, and found that area in the middle of the frontal lobe, only other areas are intact, only lesion is in that area, okay. Damage is only in that area. So he first proposed that due to lesion of that area, his speech production was stopped. Okay. So he first proposed that this area is responsible for the production of speech. Then later, other experiments confirmed. Is it clear? So that's why later they named that area as Broca's area, speech, motor speech area. In the back part, you see another dotted line area. Inside that dotted line, that area is called Wernicke's area. These are interesting. Wernicke's area is responsible for understanding the speech. So Wernicke's is responsible for what? Understanding the speech. So two different things, right? Broca's is responsible for the production, right? And Wernicke's is for the understanding, recognizing. Is it clear? So now, if your Broca's area is damaged, what will be the problem? You can't speak, right? But your Wernicke's is intact, right? So you will understand what other people are saying. But if your Wernicke's is damaged, then you will be able to speak, but you won't be able to understand what other people are saying. Yes.
Okay, I have two questions. One, what causes damage to the Broca's area?
The main reason is stroke.
Okay.
You know,
Also,
rupture of the blood vessel or capillary, or the blockage of the capillary by the clot. So blood will not go there, or the blood vessel rupture will cause the damage there. Okay. So that's the main reason of damage of brain structures.
and also when that's damaged, can you still write? You can still write, right?
Visual.
Yeah, that is another situation. Ataxia you are talking about that. Yeah, so it is a very complex condition. Reading and writing are processed in other areas, but those areas are close to these areas. So
So it could.
Yeah. So it depends how much area has been damaged. Okay. So it is very interesting and complex situation. Sometimes the person's reading ability is also affected. But for reading, writing, we have other areas in the brain. Okay, so those are few areas you just need to remember, but there are many more areas, functional areas in the cerebral cortex. Okay. Okay. Now, those areas, as I have mentioned, there are many areas, can be divided into three types of areas. Sensory areas. So some areas are sensory, some areas are motor, and some areas are association areas. Here, you see. So those areas are divided into three types: motor areas, sensory areas, and association areas. Now you tell me, very simple question. You remember the visual area here in the back? So from the eye, signal goes there, right? So is that sensory or motor? What do you think? Sensory. Very good. Because from the eye going there, right? How about auditory? Also sensory, because from the ear, signal is going there, right? Primary somatosensory area. Pain, touch, temperature, right? So all those are sensory. Primary motor. You remember? Precentral, that means in front of the central sulcus, primary motor, that red gyrus is a motor. Its name is motor, right? So primary motor, main motor. Now tell me, how about Broca's? I told you Broca's sends signal to where? The vocal cord, right? So from the brain going there, right? So that is motor. Make sense? So Broca's area, primary motor, those are the motor areas. Okay? So you see, some areas belong to sensory, some areas belong to what? Motor. Premotor is the area in front of primary motor cortex. Okay? That red one. And premotor area receives the signal from both sensory and motor areas and combine them. I'm going to talk about that. Okay? So, association areas. There are some areas, they do what? They get the signal from both sensory and motor, more than one areas, or from two sensory or two motor. So simple is, there are some areas that receive signal from more than one areas and combine them. Is it clear? Like you are combining two or more signals together. Those areas are called the association areas. Its name is telling you. Now, why association areas are very important? Because you know that when you do something, multiple tasks are together, most of the cases. Like when I am giving my lecture, you are doing what? You are listening, right? You are also seeing. Just this is simple. You are listening from the ear, signal is going to primary auditory cortex, right? Remember I showed it? From the eye, signal is going primary to primary visual cortex here, right? They are far from each other, but they need to talk to each other. Make sense? Otherwise, if you see that sound is, I am moving my mouth, you are looking that, and sound is coming from this skull. Would it make sense? I am moving my mouth, but sound is coming from there. You will get confused, right? So if they are processed separately and they don't talk to each other, that will be a big problem. Make sense? So there are many areas that are combining two or more functional areas together, right? To make sense that yes, it makes sense. Okay? So those are the association areas. Okay? Every time you walk, right? You see when you go down, right, to the stair, you see how you know, uh, most of the tasks are related to more than one task together. Gray matter, white matter. Um, this is gray matter. So if you cut the brain, outer part is the gray matter, inner part is the white matter. That I have showed in last lecture too. That is the brain. Now if you cut the spinal cord, what you will see? You will see the inner part is the gray matter. This is gray matter. Outer part is the white matter. If you cut the cerebellum, you will see what? Outer part is gray matter, inner part is white matter. Gray matter. So, in the cerebellum, outer is the gray matter, which is the cortex, and inner is white matter. In the spinal cord or the brain stem, you see the brain stem, very inner part around that round cavity, that is the gray matter, and rest part is white matter. The lower one is the spinal cord, the inner butterfly shaped area is the gray matter, around that is white matter. But if you cut the cerebellum, see the outer layer, it's like a piece of cake. The outer cream part is the cortex, gray matter, and inner is the white matter. Now you also must remember, I showed you why this area is gray. Because of the presence of what? Why this area is gray? Why this area is white? Myelinated axon, right? Myelin sheath is white. So this area is white, right? And this area is gray because inside the cell body you have the micelle granules, right? Remember in last class I showed you. So where you see the gray matter, that means you have many cell bodies are there, right? And in the cytoplasm you have the micelle granules. Where you see the white matter, you have many myelinated fibers. White myelin sheath is there. Okay. Two hemispheres. You see, these two hemispheres are attached to each other by this structure, this white band. This is called the corpus callosum. Corpus callosum. Okay. Corpus callosum. I did a lot of research on corpus callosum. That was actually my graduate research. My PhD thesis was on that, corpus callosum. So, corpus callosum is the structure that attaches two hemispheres together, hold them together. But that is not the main function. The function is through the corpus callosum, the fibers, you look at me, from one hemisphere goes to the opposite one. So from this hemisphere, many fibers are going to this hemisphere, many fibers are going to this, like this. And this is the corpus callosum, this. Okay. So the fibers pass through the corpus callosum, and that's how the two hemispheres talk to each other. Is it clear? So signal is going from this. You have how many primary visual cortex? Two, right? Because you have two hemispheres. They must talk to each other because they are getting signal from two different eyes, right? Must talk to each other. You are listening through your 2 ears, by your 2 ears, right? They are going there, so they must talk to each other. Is it clear? So through the corpus callosum, the signal goes from one side to the other. Yeah. Homunculus is singular and homunculi is plural. If I add I at the end, that's plural. Like sulcus, sulci, gyrus, gyri. Homunculus, homunculi. This is very interesting. Homunculi are the entire body maps in the brain. Your whole body map is present in two gyri. These two gyri you already know. This is the primary motor cortex or gyrus, and this is the primary somatosensory. I showed you. This is the central sulcus, right? So in front you have primary motor cortex or gyrus, behind primary somatosensory cortex or gyrus. Your entire body map is present in those two gyri or cortex, in primary motor and primary somatosensory. Same in this side. Those are called homunculi, maps of entire body. Now you see, this is the primary somatosensory. That's why it is called sensory homunculus. How the body parts are represented on the primary somatosensory cortex here. That has been shown here. Now you see what is interesting, that although entire body map is there, but is it proportionate to your body or disproportionate? How do you think? Disproportionate, right? Because you see your hand is represented in big area, right? In that map. But trunk, although trunk is actually much bigger than your hand, right? But trunk is in a smaller area. Your foot is in a big area, but thigh or leg are not. That's why your face is in big area. That's why it is a disproportionate body map in the primary somatosensory and primary motor cortex. So I'll say homunculi are disproportionate body map.
So is this proof that guys really don't think when they use their genitals? They don't think as much, do they?
This is they didn't show all the body parts here. Certainly the genital area is represented in the somatosensory cortex, because you know that sensation, right? Goes there. They didn't. That part is probably hidden. Not sure. But certainly it must be there, because that is an area sensation goes there.
They're on one side.
Yeah, it's a very small area.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah. So you see there. It must be there. I don't know. Okay, so you didn't say that. Okay, now why the hand area in the brain is much bigger? What do you think?
You use it for everything.
You use the fingers, right? Hand to touch and feel more, right? Then in the finger you have more receptors in the fingertip. Fine touch, right? You can feel. So you use your hands much more than other areas of the body, right? For touch sensations. So this is, now I add this word. Homunculi are disproportionate use dependent map. Use dependent means which part you use more, right? That area is bigger. The part you don't use a lot, that area needs less neuron. Is it clear? The area you used more needs more neuron to process. The area you don't use a lot, less neuron. That's why the size of that area is smaller or bigger. So use dependent. Now interestingly, a number of experiments have found that this map can be changed. I did one research in Canada, interesting, in a raccoon. So I dissected the nerve here. Okay, a normal surgical procedure like human, so won't feel pain. Of course, okay. So dissected the nerve. So the signal was not going from here to the brain. Make sense? To the finger area. So after a few weeks, I have found that in raccoon, that area is gone. So what happened? The other finger areas around that encroached, took over that area entirely. So you see, very much use dependent, right? And that map is changing. The people who played piano like 30 years, 40 years from childhood, okay? A lot of experiments have been done. That area expands and much bigger than normal average people, okay? So this is an use dependent map in the somatosensory cortex as well as in the motor cortex. If I use my fingers a lot, that area, the neurons will occupy more area. Okay? So that is all about the